It was the spring of 1877, when the cottonwoods leafed green along the creek and Dusty Creek's main street shimmered with heat rising off hard-packed earth. Luke Callahan, 35 years old, came out of McKinnon's general store with a sack of flour slung over one massive shoulder, a coil of rope hanging from his hand. He stood 6'5", shoulders broad as a barn door, chest thick from years of ranch work. Children whispered that he looked strong enough to lift a horse, and most grown men didn't bother to disagree. Luke's boots thudded against the boardwalk as he crossed toward his wagon. He was the kind of man who filled a street without meaning to. A giant, yet quiet, moving with the steady patience of someone used to doing every task alone. On the far side of the street, Anna Elwood, just 8 years old, watched him with the bold curiosity of childhood. She had a ribbon half loose in her hair and dust on her boots. Her mother's hand tugged at her sleeve, but Anna didn't move. She stood, staring at the towering rancher as if daring herself to step into his shadow. The moment came quick. She pulled free, marched across the street, and stopped in front of him. She had to crane her neck to meet his eyes. Her voice carried, small but sure, "I'll marry you when I'm old enough." Laughter broke from the bystanders. A blacksmith leaning in his doorway, 2 women carrying baskets of bread. Even the storekeeper behind Luke's shoulder let out a chuckle. But Luke did not laugh. He set the sack of flour down on the edge of the wagon, straightened, and looked at her properly. His face was weathered by sun and wind, but his eyes softened as they fell on the girl standing bold before him. "That's a strong promise," he said, voice low, gentle, the kind of tone he might use to calm a spooked horse. "You keep it safe. Promises like that can carry a whole life." Anna's small chin lifted. "I will," she said, her eyes never leaving his. The crowd's laughter died away. There was something in her certainty that silenced them. For a moment, Luke felt the odd weight of her words, like a pebble dropped into deep water. Then she turned and ran back to her mother, ribbon flying behind her like a bright streamer in the sun. That evening, wagons stood outside the Elwood cottage. Chairs tied with rope, quilts rolled, and a cradle wedged between trunks. The family was moving west. Anna helped as best an 8-year-old could, dragging small bundles toward the wagon bed. Her mother's voice was sharp with fatigue. "Anna, stop dawdling. We've miles to ride before nightfall." Anna clutched the ribbon from her hair and shook her head stubbornly. "I told Luke Callahan I'm going to marry him when I'm old enough." Her father, tightening the harness on the lead horse, gave a short laugh. "That big cowboy? He's old enough to be your father and set in his ways. You'll forget this by the time we're past the county line." "I won't," Anna said, fierce for her size. "He's strong, and he's kind, and I promised." Her mother sighed, tucking a blanket tighter around the cradle. "Children's words, Anna. Life will give you other choices." But Anna's jaw stayed set. She climbed onto the wagon seat last, eyes sweeping the town as if vowing to hold every board and beam in memory. When Luke passed with fence posts in his wagon, he raised his hand in a quiet farewell. She lifted hers higher and held it until the road bent and Dusty Creek vanished behind cottonwoods. That night, Luke stood on the porch of his big ranch house, a house built for a family he didn't have. He held his hat in his hands and listened to the wind move through the grass. The rooms inside were swept and silent, the clock ticking like a hammer. And though he would never admit it aloud, the words of a child lingered in him like the echo of a bell. "I'll marry you when I'm old enough." 12 years passed. The sun rose and set over the wide Wyoming plains, and Luke Callahan remained the same towering figure, a giant cowboy living alone on his land. Most days began before dawn. Luke saddled his horse in silence, the only sounds the creak of leather and the soft snort of the gelding. He rode fence lines, hauled water, drove cattle across the creek. His strength never failed him, but when the work was done, the weight of solitude pressed heavier than any load. Evenings were the hardest. Luke ate alone at the head of a long wooden table, tin plates scraping in the quiet. The chairs down each side remained empty, polished but unused, as if waiting for a family that never came. After supper, he carried his lamp through the dark hall and paused at doorways, rooms that had been swept, prepared, and shut long ago. One, the smallest, he lingered on longest. Bare walls. No laughter, just stillness. He closed the door and wound the pocket watch his father had left him, the steady tick filling the silence like a reminder of passing years. The people of Dusty Creek whispered. Some said Luke had grown too big for companionship, that no woman would ever marry such a man. Others said he was too proud, too silent, too alone. But when he walked into town, broad shoulders brushing the doorframe of McKinnon's store, every voice lowered. None dared speak it to his face. On a bright summer morning in 1889, the stagecoach rattled down Dusty Creek's main street. The townsfolk paused in their errands as the door swung open and a young woman stepped out. She wore a traveling dress, the color of pale sky, her auburn hair drawn back neatly, her green eyes scanning the town with quiet purpose. It was Anna Elwood, now 20. She stood tall on the street where she had once been a child. Dust clung to the hem of her skirt, but her step was steady, her gaze unflinching. Luke Callahan, unloading sacks of feed from his wagon, looked up. His hands froze on the rope. The years had etched his face, carved deeper lines around his mouth, but his eyes were the same steel blue they had been the day she left. Anna's heart beat fast, but her voice was clear. Luke Callahan. He set the sack down slowly, as though afraid the vision might vanish if he moved too quick. Anna, he said, his voice low and rough. The crowd stilled, watching, whispers rising like dust in the summer air. For a moment, it was only the two of them standing in the street, the giant cowboy and the girl who had once promised to return. Sheriff Hart stepped forward, tugging at the brim of his hat. Boarding house burned last winter, he told her in his plain, steady way. No decent place left in town. Closest roof fit for you is out at Callahan's ranch. Esther Pike gave a gentle nod of agreement. You'll be safe there, child. He's got the room. The townsfolk murmured, but none dared challenge it. Luke only gave a single nod, silent as ever, and reached for her trunk. And now she had come back. Anna gathered her skirts and stepped up onto the wagon bench. Luke had already lifted her trunk into the bed with effortless strength, his silence steady as stone. She settled beside him, hands folded in her lap, her ribboned hat holding back the wind. Luke clucked the reins, and the horses started forward. The stagecoach rattled away in front of them, its dust rising like the years that had slipped between them. He drove slow along the rutted road, the sky wide and cloudless above. For a long stretch, neither spoke. The leather reins creaked, the horses' hooves struck the hard earth, and the silence between them stretched like the land itself. At last Anna turned, her voice steady. It hasn't changed. Not the valley. Not you. Luke's jaw worked as he studied the road. Some things don't. His eyes flicked to her, then back again. But you did. You grew up. Her lips curved, small but certain. And I came back. When the ranch house came into view, Anna drew a sharp breath. The white clapboard walls rose tall against the blue horizon, larger than she remembered, the porch wide, the barn sturdy. But the windows were dark, curtains drawn, the yard bare of flowers or children's toys. It was a house that had never been lived in fully. Strong bones, empty heart. Luke reined the horses in and climbed down. He moved with quiet efficiency, unloading her trunk from the wagon bed. Anna stepped onto the porch, her boots clicking against the boards, her hand brushing the rail as though testing its claim to her. Inside, the house smelled of wood and dust, of meals cooked for one. The parlor held a piano closed tight, its keys untouched. The dining table stretched long with polished chairs waiting. Upstairs, Luke showed her the room across from his own. Bare walls, clean linens, sunlight falling across the quilt. Anna stood in the doorway, taking it in. It feels like a place waiting for someone to come home. Luke's broad frame filled the hall behind her, his voice rough. Been waiting a long time. Their eyes met, and for the first time Luke felt the silence of his house shift. The empty rooms no longer seemed quite so hollow. That evening, Anna helped in the kitchen. She rolled her sleeves and kneaded bread while Luke chopped wood outside, the rhythm of his axe sharp in the dusk. Later, as he sat at the long table, he looked up to find Anna setting down a second plate beside his own. The chairs down either side were still empty, but the far end of the table was no longer. The giant cowboy had company at last. The church hall glowed with lamplight that evening, laughter and fiddle music spilling out into the warm night. Dusty Creek's families had gathered for the summer social, their tables spread with pies, biscuits, and coffee strong enough to rattle teeth. Luke Callahan entered late, his broad shoulders filling the doorway. Conversation faltered for a heartbeat, as it often did when the giant cowboy walked in. But when Anna Elwood stepped in beside him, whispers rose like wind through dry grass. She wore a pale blue dress, simple but bright against the dark of his vest. Her hand rested lightly against her skirt as she walked, calm in her bearing, though she felt the weight of every eye. They sat near the wall, Luke uneasy in the press of people, Anna greeting familiar faces with a nod. For a while the music carried, couples twirled across the boards, and children chased one another around the pew benches pushed aside. Then Silas Granger stood, his voice sharp enough to slice through the fiddle tune. "Well, if it isn't the giant of Dusty Creek," he said, loud enough for all to hear. "And the little girl who once promised to marry him. Looks like she meant it after all." A ripple of uneasy laughter followed. Silas took a step forward, his smirk cutting across the hall. "Tell me, Callahan, how many more years before she grows tired of a man twice her age? A promise made by a child can't bind a woman. She'll see sense soon enough." The laughter swelled, crueler this time. Some smiled behind their hands. Others shifted uncomfortably, unwilling to speak, but unwilling to defend. Luke's fists curled on the table. His chest rose with restrained breath, his jaw set to steel. But before he could rise, Anna stood. Her boots struck the floorboards, the sound sharp and clear. She walked into the open space at the center of the hall, her back straight, her eyes flashing. The laughter faltered. Anna's voice rang bright, carrying to the rafters. "I was a child when I made that promise. I am a woman now, and I keep my word." Silence fell like a stone. She turned, her gaze sweeping the room, steady and unwavering. "Luke Callahan is the man I choose. Not because I am foolish, not because I am bound, but because I know my own heart. I will not be shamed for standing by it." The cruel smirks melted. Some lowered their eyes, ashamed. Others nodded slowly, murmuring approval. Luke rose then, stepping forward to stand behind her. His shadow fell long, his eyes locked on Silas. He didn't need to speak. The hall had already heard what mattered. Silas sneered, but the laughter had died. The fiddle struck up again, hesitant at first, then stronger. Couples returned to the floor. Anna walked back to Luke's side. He looked down at her, his expression carved in stone, but his eyes carried something new. Pride. The giant cowboy had never needed defending. But tonight, he had been chosen. Night fell soft over the valley, stars burning clear in the high Wyoming sky. The corrals were quiet, the cattle bedded near the creek. A lantern glowed low on the porch of the Callahan ranch, its circle of light touching the worn boards and the broad figure of Luke Callahan, seated in silence. Across from him sat Anna Elwood, her hands folded in her lap, her face half in shadow. The only sounds were the chirp of crickets and the slow creak of the rocking chair beneath Luke's weight. Anna gazed at the horizon where the cottonwoods cut against the stars. Her voice came low, almost as if she spoke to the night itself. When I was a girl, I used to imagine Dusty Creek different than it was. I'd picture the town brighter, bigger, with you walking through it. Luke turned his head, his steel blue eyes settling on her. I never forgot that day, she said, a quiet smile curving her lips. When I told you I'd marry you, other girls played with ribbons and dolls. I thought about you, about your ranch, about keeping my word. Luke leaned forward, his forearms resting on his knees, his hands heavy between them. Anna, I carried those words longer than I ought to. A child's promise, bright and foolish maybe. But it stayed with me. Nights when this house was too quiet, I'd remember. The silence thickened between them, heavy with truth. Anna's eyes glimmered in the lantern light. Then maybe it wasn't foolish. Maybe it was meant to last. Luke's chest rose with a long breath. He lowered his gaze. I've lived alone too long. Strong hands, strong shoulders, but not strong enough to believe I deserved a promise like that. Her fingers brushed the edge of his chair, light against the rough wood. You do, she whispered. The giant cowboy sat still, the stars above burning cold, but something in the night air shifted, less empty, more waiting. After a moment, Anna tilted her head. What do you dream of, Luke, when the work is done and the night is quiet? His voice came slow, weighted. A house that isn't silent, rooms filled with laughter instead of echoes, a child's boots by the door, a voice at the table that isn't only my own. Her hand steadied against his sleeve. Then let me be the one to give you that. Let me be the voice in that house. Luke lifted his eyes from her hand to her face. The lantern light traced the curve of her cheek, the steadiness of her gaze. For a man who had built his life on silence, the pull of that look felt stronger than any tether. He leaned closer, his voice rough. Anna. She rose slightly from her chair, her hand tightening on his sleeve. The space between them vanished. It was not hurried, nor reckless. It was steady, certain. The joining of a promise spoken long ago and the life it had grown into. Her lips lingered against his, soft and unyielding, and for a moment the years of loneliness fell away. When they parted, Anna's eyes searched his. Do you believe me now? Luke exhaled, his great hand closing firmly over hers. His voice came rough, but true. I want to. The crickets sang on, the cottonwoods whispered in the wind, but the air on that porch had changed forever. The Callahan ranch lay dark under a moonless sky, the wind carrying a restless hush through the grass. Inside, the lamp was out, but Luke sat awake in the parlor, his revolver resting on the table beside his hand. A knock thundered at the door. Luke rose, his boots steady on the floorboards, and opened it to find Silas Granger on the porch. Two men flanked him, their faces shadowed, their hands hovering near their belts. Thought I'd pay a call, Silas said, his grin sharp. Heard the giant cowboys taken in company. Figured I'd see for myself. His eyes slid past Luke toward the stairwell where Anna Elwood stood wrapped in a shawl, her hair loose from sleep. Luke stepped forward, filling the doorway, the revolver now in his hand. You've seen enough. Silas's smirk deepened. She's too young to know better. You're stealing her future, Callahan. Marry me, and she'd have land, money, a name that means something. Anna's voice cut sharp from behind Luke. I'd sooner starve than wear your name. The porch went still. One of Silas's men shifted, his boot scraping the boards, but Luke's revolver rose, steady as iron, the barrel trained on Silas's chest. Silas's smile faltered. His hand twitched toward his pistol, but the giant cowboy's aim never wavered. The tick of Luke's pocket watch inside his vest was the only sound, steady as a heartbeat. Finally, Silas exhaled through clenched teeth. He lifted his hands, palms out, and stepped back. This isn't over, Callahan. You can't guard her every hour of the day. Luke's voice came low, cutting through the dark. Try me. Silas spat into the dirt, then turned, his men following into the shadows. The sound of hooves carried them into the night. Luke lowered the revolver and closed the door. The room fell into silence again, broken only by the crackle of the dying fire. Anna stepped forward, her shawl clutched tight, her eyes unshaken. "He won't stop, Luke." Luke holstered the gun, his broad shoulders steady. "Then he'll learn what it means to stand against me." For the first time in years, Anna saw not just the lonely giant of Dusty Creek, but the protector he was, and the partner he could be. In the days leading to the wedding, Dusty Creek buzzed with talk. On the boardwalk outside McKinnon's store, old men muttered, "She's too young, he's too old, won't last." At the well, women whispered that Anna Elwood was throwing her life away, but not all agreed. Jesse Pike, polishing tack in the livery, said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Luke Callahan's worth 10 of Silas Granger. Anna knows what she's about." Esther Pike, arms folded at her door, told her neighbors, "That girl's word is stronger than your gossip." Dusty Creek split itself in two, the doubters and the defenders. The church was filled to bursting on the wedding day. Lanterns glowed against whitewashed walls, and wildflowers lined the windowsills. Families crowded the pews, whispers running like current through the hall. At the front, Luke Callahan stood tall in his best dark coat, his frame filling the space beneath the rafters. At his side, Anna Elwood in a simple white dress, her hair braided neat, her eyes fixed steady on him. The preacher began the vows. Luke's deep voice rumbled, "Certain, I take you, Anna Elwood, to be my wife." Anna's voice followed, bright and sure, "I take you, Luke Callahan, to be my husband." Then the back doors banged open. Silas Granger strode down the aisle, his boots striking sharp, a pistol heavy on his hip. Two of his hired men lingered at the threshold, blocking the light. "Stop this sham," Silas barked, his voice ringing off the walls. "This girl belongs with me, not with a worn-out giant twice her age. Step aside, Callahan, or I'll see to it myself." Gasps rippled through the pews. Mothers drew children close. Men shifted uneasily, torn between fear and anger. Luke turned, his broad frame squaring to Silas. His voice came low, steady, carrying to the back. "You won't touch her." Silas sneered, hand resting on the grip of his pistol. "Big words. Draw, if you've got the nerve." The church tensed like a bowstring. Then a chair scraped. Sheriff Caleb Hart rose from the front pew, revolver drawn, the steel flashing in the lamplight. His gravel voice cut through the silence. "You draw, Silas, and I'll put you down before you clear the leather." Jesse Pike stepped up beside Luke, fists clenched. Esther Pike rose from her bench, her voice firm. "This town's heard enough of your poison, Silas." One by one, townsfolk stood. Some who had doubted days before now moved to stand with Luke and Anna, their faces set. The division was gone. Dusty Creek had chosen its side. Silas looked from face to face, his sneer faltering. His fingers twitched at his pistol, but with a dozen eyes locked on him and the sheriff's barrel aimed square, he slowly raised his hands. "You'll regret this," he spat, his voice breaking. He turned and stormed down the aisle, the slam of the church door echoing long after he was gone. His hired men followed into the daylight. The silence lingered. Then the preacher cleared his throat. His voice shook, but he carried on. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife." Luke bent, lowering his head until his lips met Anna's. The kiss was unshaken, certain. When they pulled apart, the hall erupted with applause, boots stamping, hands clapping, voices rising. The giant cowboy of Dusty Creek was no longer alone. Snow pressed heavy against the windows, the wind whistling down from the ridge. Outside, the Callahan ranch lay white and still beneath the drifts. But inside the house, warmth glowed from every corner. Boots rested by the door. Luke's broad, scuffed pair set neatly beside Anna's smaller ones. On the mantel above the hearth, vases of dried wildflowers stood, gathered by Anna in the summer months and kept through the cold. The long dining table, once echoing with silence, now held life. Quilts lay folded at one end, a basket of sewing at the other. On the wall above the fire, children's drawings had been pinned in crooked rows, bright sketches Jesse Pike had made, promising to teach the little one when the time came. He had laughed and declared himself Uncle Jesse, earning a smile from Luke that surprised even himself. Anna sat in the rocker by the fire, a soft quilt draped around her shoulders. Her hand rested on the swell of her belly, the quiet rhythm of life stirring beneath. Luke sat close beside her, one arm around her shoulders, his great frame bent gently toward her, as though even now he feared she might vanish. The giant cowboy, once a figure of silence and solitude, now sat in a room alive with warmth. The crackle of the fire, the hum of Anna's voice, the rustle of fabric as she worked, all of it filled the house with the music he had once only dreamed of. Luke's eyes swept the room, the flowers, the sketches, the boots by the door, the woman at his side, and he whispered, his voice rough with wonder. "This is what I dreamed of. A house that isn't silent. A family." Anna leaned her head against his shoulder, her smile soft. She had been only 8 when she made a child's promise, and 20 when she returned to keep it. Now she was a woman grown, carrying the first sign of the family she had vowed to give him. Her voice was steady as the firelight. "And it's only beginning." The wind howled outside, rattling the shutters. But within the Callahan ranch house there was peace and promise, and the steady glow of a life no longer lived alone. The lonely giant of Dusty Creek had found his home at last.